from Meridian Medical Center, Tema, is right here with us. Her name is Fawzia Baidu. Salam alaikum, Fawzia.
Alaikum salam.
How are you doing?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm doing well.
It's good to be back.
Yes, good to see you. Your intermittent fasting tips, they're working for me. After 2 o'clock, I shut down. And then 16 hours, I'm back again.
Sure.
So thank you so much for the tips. So what exactly is G6PD deficiency, and how does it impact our dietary choices?
So good morning to your viewers and listeners, those who are streaming live on Facebook. Good morning to everyone. But before we delve into the topic, I want us to understand the statistics surrounding G6PD, because it's not a non-communicable disease, but it's something that affects quite a number of people around the world. Globally, there are about 400 million people living with G6PD.
Wow,
yes, and out of that number, 7.5% of that are carriers, and you have 2.9% of that population living with the deficiency, that is full defect. Yes, because we have partial defect and full defect. We'll get into that.
Yes.
And then also, when it comes to Ghana here, according to a study that was done, we found out that 23% of the male population in southern Ghana were living with G6PD, as compared to 3% of the female population. And in the northern part of Ghana, it was 11% for the male population. So it affects quite a number of people. And when we say G6PD, it stands that G6PD represents glucose 6-phosphate dehydrogenase. It's an important enzyme or protein that protects the red blood cells. Okay, so people living with G6PD deficiency either do not make the G6PD, which is the enzyme, or they are able to make it, but the body is not able to use that G6PD that they have produced. What the G6PD does is that it regulates various biochemical reactions in the body, and then it's also responsible for keeping the red blood cells healthy. Now, our red blood cells are responsible for carrying oxygen to the tissues and organs of the body from the lungs. So if without enough of the G6PD, what happens is that your red blood cells break down quickly or prematurely. Normal red blood cells have a lifespan of about 120 days, which is around 4 months. Yes, but people with the deficiency realize that their red blood cells begin to break down quickly or prematurely, which can lead to what we call hemolysis, and the hemolysis can eventually lead to hemolytic anemia.
How can you tell just by looking at somebody that they have a deficiency in G6PD?
No. It's not something you can tell by looking at a person. So they would have to run some labs to be able to detect the G6PD. Luckily for us now in Ghana here, for the pregnant women who start antenatal quite early, visit the various health facilities or the government hospitals, what happens is that as part of the routine labs that are done for them, they do a urine and stool test, so they check for the G6PD. But back in the day, you realize that people didn't know of their status as to whether they were living with the condition or not. And also quite recently as well, until a baby is born and the baby presents with jaundice, that is yellowing of the skin and eyes. Last week we spoke, the doctor on the show was talking about neonatal jaundice. Yes, so when red blood cells are broken down, you realize that it produces a yellow byproduct we call bilirubin. What happens is that in people who are suffering from hemolytic crisis or hemolysis, you realize that the levels of bilirubin in their blood is way elevated, so it's above the normal levels, and that leads to the yellowing of their skin and eyes, and that's one of the symptoms of G6PD deficiency when they are having a crisis. So you realize that their skin is yellow, their eyes are also yellow, they experience shortness of breath, they experience palpitations, and then those are quite, and then fever and headache. So those are some of the symptoms that G6PD presents with when they are having a crisis or hemolysis. Yes.
Can the crisis be fatal?
Yes. So there are certain foods and certain medications that will trigger a crisis in someone having G6PD. But if we are able to avoid those medications and food items and drugs, then it wouldn't trigger a reaction. But then, of course, there are some of the crises that can be life-threatening.
Okay. Well, what are some of the things that you should not be eating?
Okay.
If you have a G6PD
Yeah,
deficiency?
so before we talk about that, earlier on in my submission, I made mention of that either you have the deficiency or you don't have it. But most of the times it is linked to the X sex chromosome. So for women, you have two sex chromosomes, that is XX, and then male have XY.
Yeah.
But mostly it's more predominant in men than in women, because for women, if you are having a baby and you are trying to know whether the child will be a male or female, it means that child will take one sex chromosome from their mom and another one from their dad. So if it's a girl, then if it's on one sex chromosome, then it's either they wouldn't have the deficiency or they will be carriers. That is, if either parent has the deficiency. But for men, automatically, or they stand a higher chance of getting the full deficiency.
So
it's
partial
defects or full defects. So for the men, they are mostly, they have the defects, and then the women are the carriers. So carrier meaning that they have the genes, but they don't really show symptoms as compared to the men.
Okay. And then how does it impact the kind of food that you eat or shouldn't eat?
Yes, so for people who are living or suffering from G6PD deficiency, one food they need to stay away from is fava beans. So at some point in time, the deficiency was called favism, because people who live in such conditions are supposed to avoid fava beans, and it's part of the legumes family. And they are also supposed to stay away from some other legumes such as chickpeas, green beans, and the rest.
What are fava beans? What do they look like?
It's a green bean like that. It looks like a pea. I don't know how common they are in our part of the world, I mean Ghana, but out there it's common. The second one has to do with red wine and then grapes.
Okay.
Yes. The third food item has to do with soya products. So they are not supposed to take any soya product at all. But you can take the other protein family, which is the animal protein. So your fish, your meat, your eggs, you can take those ones. Then they are also supposed to stay away from tonic water.
Okay.
Yeah. And then the mothballs, or what we call camphor, they're also supposed to stay away from those ones.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. Well, you're watching GTV Breakfast, and today we're looking at understanding G6PD deficiency and nutrition. You do know that good nutrition is vital for healthy growth and development, but for people with G6PD deficiency, there will be certain foods that they are supposed to keep in mind and to stay away from. So this conversation is happening for us to understand the relationship between nutrition and G6PD deficiency, and how the choices of the foods that you eat can affect your overall health. And our guest is Fosia Bedu from the Meridian Medical Center, Tema. Your messages on 055-556-1034. So we've looked at the foods that people should stay away from if they have the condition. Do you have any supplements that can help with the nutrition of people who have G6PD deficiency?
Okay, so because the foods that they are supposed to stay away from, because it will trigger a crisis in them, we don't really advise on supplementation, unless of course maybe the person is vegan But other than that, they can still enjoy their normal meals, their balanced meals. So
vegan meaning they don't eat any meat products.
They don't eat any meat products. They do more of whole grains, nuts, and seeds. And because we mentioned soya bean, so they may not take soya bean. So in that case, then maybe they would have to do some form of supplementation and still consume some of the foods. But other than that, they can consume their whole grains, which is the maize, the rice, the quinoa, the millet, and all those things. They can also consume their animal protein, and then the plant animal protein, yes, and then the plant protein. So with the animal protein, you have your red meat, you have your fish, you have your chicken, you have your eggs. Then for the plant protein, they can do the almonds and some of the seeds. Then they can still do their fruits and vegetables. Most people live their life without really knowing they live with the condition. And fortunately for some, they are able to get away with it, even though they may consume certain foods that they are not supposed to. But it's better safe than sorry, because you may not know whether for you, if you consume those foods, it could be life-threatening or it could impact your health greatly. So it's best to know. And if you are not aware that you have the condition, you can just walk into any health facility, and then they would run the labs or run the test and then assess whether you have the condition or not.
Is the impact instant? I mean, if you should eat foods that are not good for you as a G6PD person who is deficient, what happens to you?
Yeah, so like I said, your red blood cells will begin to break down immediately. For people who are living with the condition and are food defects, for such people, aside from the foods, there are some medications that they are also not supposed to take, like some anti-malarial medications. And if you happen to take some of those things, your red blood cells will begin to break down very fast. And it may not be fatal right away, but if you begin to experience the symptoms we mentioned earlier, and you don't take the necessary steps to visit the nearest health facility, then it could lead to death eventually.
Okay. What kind of test is available to detect G6PD?
Yeah, so like I mentioned, when you visit the health facility, you can just tell them you want to find out your G6PD status, and then there are some particular labs that we do.
Is it a blood test?
Yeah, it's a blood test.
Okay.
Yes.
In terms of cost, is this on the National Health Service?
No, it's not covered on the National Health
In terms
Service.
of cost?
But I think, fortunately for the pregnant women who visit the government hospitals, because the NHI is active in the government institutions, and because of the routine labs that they do, it's covered as part of the labs that they do for the pregnant women. So yes. But other than that, if you visit a private health facility, it's not covered under the National Health Insurance. So definitely you would have to make payment for that.
Can you list again for those who just probably joined in the trigger foods?
Yes, so we have the soya products, we have red wine, and then red grapes as well. We have tonic water, then we have fava beans, and then some other legumes as well. Yes.
Why does wine? What's inside wine that causes a trigger?
There's a compound in it that when they take would begin to make their red blood cells to break down quickly, because earlier when I mentioned that the normal lifespan of the red blood cells is 4 months, or around 120 days. But when you take something that triggers the condition, your red blood cells are broken down prematurely. They break down faster than the body can replace them. And when it happens like that, it leads to hemolysis, which can cause hemolytic anemia.
What about these diets, keto diet and all these kind of, do they have any impact on?
Like I always say, I don't support keto diet in any way. But just make sure that you are having your normal balanced diet or eating your normal balanced meals. Make sure that you are eating from across the food groups, and then you'll be okay having in mind that you need to stay away from those foods that will trigger a crisis if you have the condition, and then you'll be fine.
Is this a condition that can go away? Or?
It's not curable, unfortunately, because it's a inherited condition, so it's not curable. But African men, and then Mediterranean men, and then Asian men stand a higher risk because of, I don't know how God designed it, but it happens like people of such races are at risk of getting the condition. So it's more prevalent among those races as compared to the other races.
In your practice, how often do you see people with G6PD?
Not so often. I've met 3 people so far. One was a small boy who had a food defect. Like I mentioned earlier on, for the men, they have a higher risk of being born food defects with the condition. And then the others were 2 young ladies. So I think it's not so common because it's a risk or a probability that you'll be born with the condition if either parents or both parents have the condition. It's just like sickle cell anemia or sickle cell, yes. So that is it.
Would you put this, how different is this from, let's say, food allergies?
This is quite serious as compared to food allergies, because it could be life-threatening. Food allergies are also life-threatening, so they fall on the same scale. But with food allergies, one thing about it is that most people, as parents, that is why as parents you need to be on the lookout. If you give birth to your child and you don't know whether the child has a food allergy or not, because food allergies, the allergy test is not something that is easily done. So when you would have to monitor or pay attention to what your child eats until you eat something, then you would know that, okay, you are allergic to this food. But with the G6PD, like I mentioned, fortunately for us now, when your mom is pregnant or when your wife is pregnant, as part of the routine labs that she starts with when she visits the hospital for antenatal, they conduct some of these tests. And then if you give birth to your child and the child has jaundice, then they would run some tests to determine whether the child has G6PD or not. But other than that, they are not common tests that are done to say, unless you present with the symptoms before they do the labs to identify whether you have the condition or not. But either way, both are all life-threatening. Yeah, because if you eat foods or take medications that will trigger the condition, it could be life-threatening.
Apart from jaundice, what are the other diseases associated with G6PD?
Okay, so mostly jaundice, but the other thing is fatigue, shortness of breath, headache, fever, among others. Yeah.
And in terms of lifestyle changes, what kind of changes do you have to effect to manage your G6PD?
In terms of lifestyle changes, the diet is one, because it's very important that you watch what you eat. Aside from that too, you need to avoid taking alcohol. So the red wine I spoke of, it's an alcoholic beverage, although it contains the compound antioxidant resveratrol, which is good for your heart. But you are supposed to stay away from that. And for so many reasons why you should stay away from alcohol, because each time you take an alcoholic beverage, a cell in your liver dies. So there's no safe level to alcohol, although it's recommended that for men, if you have to consume alcohol, don't take more than 2 drinks a day. For a woman, don't take more than a drink per day. So your maximum should be 2 for a man, and then for a woman, maximum 1. But either way, alcohol is not good. Even if you are taking it within the recommended dosage.
A cell dies?
Yes, a cell dies. So you can count the number of times you've taken alcohol and do the calculations in your head to know the number of cells that have had.
But somebody will say the cells are plenty.
And once the cells die, I mean, that is it.
They don't come back?
They don't
No
come
resurrection
back.
for them?
No.
Okay. All right. Well, you know, you heard it from our dietitian, Fosia Bedu.
And then exercise is very important.
It's important,
Yeah.
Okay. Good. So watch your dietary choices, exercise, and manage your lifestyle so you can manage the G6PD deficiency. What parting words, what key takeaways do you want?
Yeah, and one thing I want to mention is that as parents, you know, in Ghana here, when our kids or our siblings are going to the secondary school, the boarding house for the first time, we are in the habit of putting some camphor in their chalk boxes or trunks. And if you don't know whether your child has the condition or not, it can trigger a crisis in the child.
The camphor?
Yes.
So be careful.
Be careful.
Okay. All right. Anything else you want to add before we're done?
I'll just say that if anyone wants to reach out to me,
sure.
Yes, they can reach out to me on Facebook as Fozia Abdul Rahman, on Instagram as Fozia Beidu Abdul Rahman. They can also WhatsApp me on 024-022-6211. Or on, yeah.
Okay. All right. So that's how you can get in touch with Fozia Beidu from the Meridian Medical Center, Tema. This conversation is on Facebook. So go to Facebook and you can watch it again. You can share the link with your friends for them to know exactly what G6PD deficiency is all about. Fozia, thank you so much.
Thank you, Chuka.
Okay. And for those of you who woke up angry this morning, let me give you a few tips. Okay, so breathe in through your nose and out through your mouth. Through your nose in and out. One more time. Out. It's okay to be angry, but don't go over the top. All right? That's it. It's not good for the blood pressure. Yeah, keep the pressure down. 120/80. Those are the numbers we want to have. 120/80. Okay, all right. We've got sports next. If your team has lost, your blood pressure will go up, but don't get too angry. We've got social media corner as well, and then we also have our headlines with my guests this morning. Who are they? Who are my guests this morning? So, they're politicians. Wanda Victor Kuto, he's from the NDC's legal team and the national communication team as well. And then Palgrave Boachi Dankwa, he's the government spokesperson on governance and security. They are come to talk about Kumewu and other matters. So you stick around. Don't go anywhere. This is GTV Breakfast. We're talking about mining as well. And then Yvette Tete, who decided one fine day to swim the whole length of the Water Lake. Davy, why? We'll get answers. Don't go anywhere.